we on?
We're on.
Hello, and welcome to the Theory of Creativity's Theory of Climate Change. You're here with Garrison, Sarah, and back from last week, the lovely Kevin Wahl.
Hi, Sarah. Kevin
Hi.
Wahl. I wish I was Kevin Wahl. That would be incredible.
Yeah, Kevin Wahl.
So, climate change. What are your guys' opinion and thoughts on climate change?
You, Kevin, go first.
I think I've got there. It's interesting. I am a man of science. I believe that science is a binding force towards positivity in this world, and to deny science is kind of foolish because it is denying fact. On the flip side, I also have very strong feelings about the nature and role of government in our society. So when it comes to things like legislating towards science, I'm not necessarily on the side of that. So I think I can bring an interesting perspective to this conversation, because while I definitely recognize climate change, and there are definitely many things that, businesses and companies can do to affect that, I also don't recognize the desire to legislate about it.
Interesting.
So, you think that? So, what you're saying is the government shouldn't have any part in funding, or?
Well, that's another matter altogether. I mean, should the government be funding research? And if the government does fund research, how much do you want? There's already people take polls about how much they trust their government all the time. So if you trust your government, if 40% of the people trust their government, does that mean 40% of the people trust scientific studies that are funded by the government? I don't think that that's necessarily the answer to that question, yes or no, but I think that there is an undeniable what's the word? What are the words that I'm looking for? A bias when it comes to a political party funding science and then finding them getting results that they're looking for as well.
So, say if they don't find the results that they're looking for, would they then push that data and evidence to the side, like it never happened, or
I should hope not. That would seem incredibly
shady. Yeah, which kind of leads to my first point, was that skeptics believe that global warming is a conspiracy. That scientists should be able to research and fund the government. So, yeah, if it is like Trump and Rush Limbaugh are a few examples of the skeptics, who are involved in the government to various levels.
So last week we talked a little bit about fringe.
Yes.
And I think that that applies even to fringe groups like skeptics, because I listen to a lot of Rush Limbaugh. I think that he's got a voice that's worth listening to from time to time.
He's entertaining.
He is very entertaining, and I don't find him to be so much of a climate change denier. He recognizes climate change every day. It's more the man-made aspect of it that he argues against. I think that there's ample evidence to suggest that climate change is influenced by man, and there's much less evidence, which I think we're going to talk about later, that suggests that it isn't. And in science, both of them carry equal validity. Just because you have more studies showing one thing does not mean that the studies showing less have any less validity. All we're trying to do in science is replicate results, and if the fewer results are still replicatable, they are still results.
Right. Yeah. The absence of evidence isn't the evidence of absence isn't. Dang it! I messed up. Absence of it.
Absence of evidence is
Right.
not.
Yeah. So just because we haven't found the evidence doesn't mean that it does or doesn't exist. Yes. So you believe that humans don't have as big of an impact as we've been led to believe.
Personally, I believe exactly that. I believe that to say that humans, it would be crazy to say that we don't have some influence on it, but to say that we have the ability to outright change the climate in ways that would make the planet unhospitable seem crazy to me. That is an opinion. That's not based in any scientific background. That is analyzing evidence that has been presented to me.
Doesn't that go to a point that you're going to make later about, if it doesn't happen to you, then why does it matter?
No, that's you.
Oh, I thought that was your point.
Well, it is my point, but you're kind of. Yeah.
If it doesn't happen to me, it doesn't matter. Is that a little bit of a callback to what's good for me is not necessarily what's good for my neighbor?
Right, from last week.
Yeah. Well, I certainly believe that still. But
A week later.
It's an interesting notion. Like, how much of climate change should we care about? How scary is this notion of the changing climate? And to be honest, I don't really have an answer to that question. I think that if you look back in the history of the Earth itself, the Earth has had various climates across its globe in various different forms as the planet has changed. And for all I know, the Earth could be a great place to live if it was 10 degrees hotter. Mm-hmm. I'm not saying one way or the other, but like realistically, it could
The
be
equator,
a great
it's 120
place.
all day.
Yeah, right. Like I know for a fact that there are some people that are attracted to that lifestyle.
Go for 15 minutes, get a tan, come to the
But
equator.
at the same time, we're just as likely to swing into a global ice age, and I know for a fact that humans do really well in the cold, generally.
So many of the coastal cities and villages and such are flooding. So I doubt that they would say that.
Kevin's shaking, he's wagging his finger.
That's not my problem. That is a direct result of choosing to live on a coastline. And the fact of the matter is that it's totally beatable. It's just those solutions are not being talked about nearly as much. Venice, Italy exists.
Right.
It's gorgeous. Gondolas are cool.
It's
if Miami turns
sinking.
out to be... but they're going to continue to prop it up if they'd like to continue to live there. Like that... And that's always been a risk. We have this myth of Atlantis that's sunk into the sea.
It's not a myth. Come on.
I think it is a great story to tell people. Whether or not it happened is something that we can't confirm or deny here today. Preponderance of evidence. Wouldn't it be incredible, though? But the point, but again, the point that I'm making is that it is a known risk of living next to the water. Sometimes the water eats your city. If you live in a high-rise in Miami, I wouldn't be worried.
Right. Yeah. Speaking of Miami, I think I watched a documentary a few months ago, and they're like raising their city or something, right? Yeah. I think that's expensive, and
I'm sure the contractors love it. I'm sure it's great for business contractors. These things come with expense. We live in a scarce society, and somebody's got to pay for it, and I don't think it should be the government, but it should be the people that live there. And maybe their local government, on the other hand, is a whole other matter. That's a terrifying thought.
Can I just add that we're all Midwesterners and literally get mild weather all year round?
For the most part, that's exactly true.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
The only thing we really have to fear is
tornadoes, I guess.
Rising fur prices on beaver.
Beavers are extinct in Ohio.
I saw one the other. It might have been a woodchuck.
They're extinct.
Well, they The reason Beaver Creek is called Beaver Creek is because we had a high abundance of beavers when we first settled here, and they killed a bunch of beavers, and so they had to re-establish them back into the wildlife back in 1960s or something like that. So
and humans playing God.
yes.
Maybe those beavers were meant to be extinct. I don't think that's...
They're kind of a weird creature anyway.
Yeah, like what? Not. Oh my. That's interesting.
Did I do something wrong?
No. I don't know. I got distracted by the computer.
Oh, okay.
It happens.
So, what are your thoughts on the 1 in every 4 people believing that global warming is a conspiracy?
Well, I think that a lot of... How big is the conspiracy? Because what at its heart, you could have global warming does somewhat appear to be a bit of a conspiracy on some level, and maybe not even on the level that a lot of people look at. Like, is there a conspiracy to keep skeptics talking? But at the same time, I think that speaks a lot to a quarter of the population being skeptical about what they're told in general.
I think it's a great idea to have a healthy dose of skepticism, but to the point where, disbelieving everything that comes out of scientific fact and scientific research, that's not skepticism, that's ignorance.
I guess the point that I'm making is that I don't believe that 25% of people are ignorant about climate science. Mm-hmm. I believe that there's fringes to that group that do believe that climate change is not real and that it's not happening, and then I think that a lot of that percentage of people not necessarily think like me, but might have similar opinions to me, where it's like, first of all, how important is this? How much of this is just necessarily true versus, did we all see An Inconvenient Truth?
No, I have not.
I haven't seen the second one, but I saw the first one because we saw it in class.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And if I recall correctly, I'm pretty sure we were supposed to have some underwater American cities. And I guess we have Houston.
Yeah.
But I'm pretty sure we're fixing that.
Yeah, well, okay, so the reason why hurricanes are so deadly is because of storm surge. It's that amount of rain that gets put onto the cities that just does not drain away for days and kills lots of people. People can go dehydrated without water and natural resources.
I thought that was one of the... I mean, not to get too deep into this, but I remember the day of the hurricane, I was listening of... which one was Houston? It was not Maria, right?
Harvey? Was it Harvey?
I remember listening to the radio the morning of the night that the hurricane hit, and they were like, it was a non-mandatory evacuation.
Yeah.
And I was just like, this is crazy. This is a hurricane. What are you messing around with this for? Tell those people to leave.
Well, the reason they said it was a non-mandatory evacuation is because the last time they did a mandatory evacuation, people died trying to get out of the city because they were stuck in traffic because it was so heavy.
I realized that. And it's still a terrifying thought. And again, what is... I said it earlier, if you're living in Miami and you're living in a high-rise, you probably don't have anything to worry about. I think that's probably also true for people that live in Houston in high-rises, because those buildings are probably not going to fall down during a hurricane, so you're probably okay if you hole up there. But if you're on any sort of ground level, you got to assume there's going to be flooding. Just go. I don't know. I've never experienced a hurricane. I've only ever experienced a very small tornado that hit a Kmart near my house.
Well, that's terrifying in itself.
Do you guys remember that here in Ohio? There was a little tornado in Beaver Creek.
Yes. What year was that?
2015.
Okay, so it was 2 years ago. Yeah. I remember when I was in high school, and I think...
Might have been 2014.
Yeah, I think you're a little bit older than me, Kevin.
I think a little bit.
I graduated in 2011.
Yeah, I graduated in 2008.
Okay. Do you remember in 2005 when the hurricanes hit New Orleans and everything down there?
Yes, I do.
And we got a huge extra tropical surge from that.
Yeah.
Man, it was crazy. My electricity was out for 2 weeks. We had to use the pool water.
Yeah.
to bathe with. Man, it was sucky. Like, I can only imagine how hard it would have been for people down south.
I can't imagine.
And we
It's
live
terrifying
in
to think about.
little old happy Ohio.
What?
No, your turn.
Oh,
Tell me about your tornado experience, Garrison. If you don't
was
have
from the
any,
one from
that's fair.
the one from 2 years ago?
Were you here for? Did you see that? Did you see anything about that?
No.
It was right outside. It was right across the street from the green.
Yeah, I only remember hearing about it.
Mm-hmm.
I guess my biggest tornado or hurricane story was I think it's like 2003, 2004. I was in Florida and I saw a few formations forming over the water, like maybe a mile, 2 miles out, and that was like pretty crazy.
That's got to be incredible. I can't. Clouds are awesome.
I love weather. I know. I hate, like, a lot of people hate talking about the weather, like complete strangers. But I love talking about it, and I love when people talk about it.
Meteorologists are. If I could have been a meteorologist, that would have been neat. But that's a lot of school.
So, yes. So, the media bubble and climate change.
Mm-hmm.
So, I kind of relate this to diet trends as well, because I think that they're fairly similar in that for diet trends, they put like two people on equal footing and they both have roughly equal time to speak and give their opinion, as if they both warrant equal attention, when in reality, one shouldn't even be looked at because it doesn't have as much support as the other, if that makes any sense.
Okay, so if we reframe that in the sense of climate science, and you have two media bubbles looking at a CNN type show,
Right.
And what we're saying here is that there's a climate scientist and a climate skeptic. He may or may not be a scientist. And they are given the same time on television to talk, and one of those two people has 97% of the science behind them, and one of them has 3% of the science behind them.
Right, like one is just some guy, and the one has as a...
First, I would wonder why the CNN did not seek out one of the 3%, or Fox News or MSNBC did not seek out one of the 3% of scientists, because that's just bad vetting on their part.
I think that's media for you.
Yeah, that absolutely is the media trying to cater a narrative. But that's, at the same... that money is a more interesting moral question in this discussion than most other things, because it could be brought up about science and media. At the end of the day, somebody has to pay for both of those things to happen. And how influenced are you going to be? Is there scientific integrity? I like to think so. I like to think yes.
Okay.
Is there media integrity? That one is harder to find.
So wait, going back to last week's conversation, we talked about education for a little bit, so do you think that in schools they should be taught to reason what good information is and what bad information is? Because, I don't think they really taught me that in high school. I had to wait till college to learn that.
That's a complicated question, because I don't know who's to dictate what good or bad information is.
Well, it's to teach reason. It's not to teach...
Okay, so what you say... actually, what you're at... Yeah, teaching reason, I think, would be incredibly important, because it's not so much what good information and bad information is. It's good arguments and bad arguments.
Yes.
It's valid versus invalid. The weight of an argument. Because I believe that, in my opinion, if the person who is speaking on it, and he shouldn't even necessarily, again, we bring up we bring up logic here. There's the logical fallacy of appealing to authority. Just because you're a scientist does not mean that your argument is good. Just because you are the most experienced scientist in your field does not mean your argument is good. Your argument is good because of the facts behind it.
Right. Like Neil deGrasse Tyson, Okay, so we talked about him a little bit last week too. He is entertaining. He's also a physicist, a very famous physicist.
Right.
Now, do you think he's famous because he's entertaining or because he's a physicist?
I'm
entertaining.
Certain he's famous because he's entertaining.
Yes.
Also, Bill Nye, like he's like an engineer or something.
Yeah.
So that's
not
right.
quite the science guy that he
Right.
claims to be. Not to take away from engineers. Engineers are great.
Yes, my parents are both engineers.
Yeah, I love my parents. I put that in the comment section of my little post because I don't think I said that last week. I love my parents.
Oh yeah, you gotta appreciate your parents giving you life.
I was pretty harsh on parents last week.
Oh yeah, oops. If nothing else, you gotta appreciate them for giving you life.
But it's great because I love this conversation. If they could get somebody who. It really doesn't matter if he's qualified or not. If the science is valid, if the science is, here is hard facts that we can repeat, it should be just as important and looked at as the 97% of results that say the other thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because just because 97% of the results say that, 3% of the results still come up this way. And that 3% needs to be eliminated for us to get a scientific law. Scientific laws are constant.
So it's the fault of the news channels for not scouting out quality people to showcase?
If the argument is that the validity of the argument comes from who's delivering it, it would definitely be better if they had. I think it would put people's minds more to ease if it was, say, a scientist that was representing either side of the argument. But even then, sometimes they do that. Sometimes they have those scientists, and they, it's hard to.
This brings up a good point. I think art and science should collaborate on a higher level because that's the only way for people to be interested in it. If you're an average Joe, you may not listen to a scientist drone on about the statistics behind carbon footprinting. You may not want to listen to it because it's frankly kind of boring unless you're really into that kind of thing.
Right.
That's a perfect segue to what I was going to bring up about it not time. I'll finish that thought on part 2. So come back for part 2, and you'll hear the rest of my thoughts.
Thank you, Garrison.
Finishing my thought on what Sarah, bouncing off what Sarah was saying about science and art. I think for people to really listen to the science, it has to relate to them on a personal level. So if more people can talk about climate change in their music, in their art, and etc., then maybe we can get more people on board.
It's a good point.
It's an interesting point because I like to think the exact opposite. I like to think that if we were to get people to objectively look at the information, there might be less people inclined to see climate change the way that they do.
Do you mean it's going to be like a kind of a laughing stock? Like how I exclaim that I'm a vegan and Garrison hates it. Kind of like the annoying climate change.
Oh man, I don't know if I mean it quite that way, but I see where you're getting at.
Yeah,
that is funny. Not so much. I think that again, when I guess the point that I'm making is that as an objective mind here, when I look at climate science evidence, I am not scared by it.
Okay.
I'm well read in it. I look at it all the time because I have a vested interest in living on this planet. But climate change doesn't frighten me. I don't see the dangers that people talk about, and it's not. I mean, again, are the dangers not affecting me? No, I just recognize some of those things that people recognize as dangerous as being part of nature.
So your thoughts are climate change isn't dangerous; it's just nature,
Undeniable.
right? So now, when you say that it's not dangerous, do you mean it's not dangerous for the planet or humans?
It's definitely not dangerous for the planet. Earth has existed for a long time, and even if everything dies on it living, the planet itself will still be A-okay.
But I like living.
I mean, I like living too, and climate change is not going to affect my small, insignificant life on it. It even probably won't affect the small, insignificant period of time that the human race gets to exist on it. Because the human race is, I think 80,000 years old, something like, as a Homo sapien.
Right, yeah.
Right around there.
Mm-hmm.
And there may be other data that suggest otherwise, but at 80,000 years old, that's an insignificant blip on this planet. And there's no evidence that we're not going to snuff ourselves out with other things tomorrow.
That's pretty pessimistic.
I wouldn't call it pessimistic. I'd call it realistic.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a pretty realistic view. It's like, well, my life is insignificant, so it doesn't really matter.
I don't believe that my life is insignificant. I think that each individual life is incredibly insignificant.
Mm-hmm.
However, I do recognize the smallness versus the bigness.
Right.
There is a big picture Earth, and it will be fine, regardless of what happens on it. Life on it may change. And I like to think that we as humans are incredibly adaptable. We have shown that we can live in just about every climate on this planet. So if the Earth goes up X degrees in X amount of years, I think that humans will be okay. If the planet's temperature goes up 100 degrees and it's a 200 degree planet, the planet is still a planet, and yeah, life might be gone. And if we do that, there's no evidence to that. There's no evidence that we're going to be able to do that. That seems unrealistic based on the models that I look at and evaluate in my own head. Even 10 degrees could drastically change the face of the planet, but I think we'll be fine. I think that in 80,000 years, it might go back to an ice age and we'll be complaining about how cold it is. And I think that one of the most important things is that, especially with conservationism is good. Conservationism is important. It ideally is a great free market idea where we try and reuse things that were thrown away.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the appropriate argument for that one would be, wouldn't you want the planet to stay the same, as it is? Sure, changing it is inevitable because the universe changes in unexpected ways.
Right.
But wouldn't you want it to stay the same? Isn't it just nice right now,
No,
it's just kind of nice.
It's fine.
Don't you
It's
like
fine.
green?
We should embrace, we need to embrace, the planet was much more green when it was hotter.
Okay,
Yeah,
but
humid, yeah. Yeah, with all the
The
humidity.
vegetation was much larger.
And the amount of oxygen in the air, big creatures. Could you
Well-
imagine?
don't you like brown?
Brown's fine too.
So yeah, what about sea life and rainforest deforestation and things like
Life
that?
finds a way. It always seems to do so on this little planet, and on many others it doesn't, but on this one, life finds a way.
So you're saying
there is bacteria that eats pollution,
Mm-hmm.
and that we didn't. I'm sure we had a hand in breeding that bacteria, but I'm certain that nature still put that bacteria there for a reason.
So you're saying if something is meant to survive, then it will.
Yes,
And okay,
natural selection is
perfect.
is real.
All right, let's
To some extent.
let's survive, guys. Let's
I
live.
think surviving would be the best thing that we could do.
But what about thriving? Hold on. You're talking about surviving.
Oh yes, yeah.
No.
Are we thriving?
Okay, hold on. Now, what would be the appropriate definition of thriving?
I'm not
Well,
sure.
we're not
No.
all thriving. There are countries starving.
Exactly.
And living on very little income and things like that. So
Absolutely true.
are we thriving as a whole, or just like first world
My
countries?
thoughts.
No, see, we are surviving, but the definition of thriving would be to have everybody on the same kind of level, same kind of plane.
Well, I think I'm not sure that how
Socialism?
you can deny people the ability to. It's not necessarily socialism unless you're enforcing it through government. But it's like we look at the climate change accord, the Paris Accord, and it's very interesting to think about when you look at people's arguments about how it is it's an agreement upon nations to let developing nations continue to develop, which kind of flies in the face of doing anything about climate change. Because if climate change is real, and I do think that there is an undeniable climate change happening on this planet, man-made or not. I need more evidence to determine a position on that. But if man-made climate change is real, then letting huge nations with huge populations and budgets going towards it continue to not care about these climate changes seems foolish. Mm-hmm. At best.
For me, I thought it was the Paris Accords was about setting a limit on the amount of basically carbon dioxide that they were putting into the air. Is that right?
It is. And those limits are basically not in place for nations like India, China, developing
the places
nations,
that have over
nations.
1 billion per capita,
nations that are still trying to establish infrastructure throughout their nation, yet still have incredibly developed parts of their world.
It's a very interesting thought. Kind of makes me mad, to be honest with you.
Well, I think that's why I agree with the president's decision to take us out of the Paris Climate Change Accords, because he says it's not a fair deal. Those are his words, and when you look at it, no, I think one of the most important things that he brings up is that no one is stopping you from adhering to the Paris Climate Accords. You can do it. In fact, here I am encouraging companies to be more responsible. It would be great if you were.
Privately funded.
Yeah, exactly. And then all these companies come out, like, we're still going to adhere to the Paris Climate Accords. That's good. Do that. Hold yourselves to higher standards. That's fine. I don't believe in globalism or telling them to do it. Let them come to the decision themselves.
And you and I differ on so many levels.
It's fun, isn't it?
No, I do. I love it because it's, it's great because I totally believe in the idea of globalization. I love the idea of one world government. And, I know, this isn't that podcast.
I believe wholeheartedly in private globalization. I think private globalization is fine.
Right.
I don't believe in legislative globalization.
Maybe I'm just thinking about it in a utopian world. Maybe I should write a book.
The utopian world is the one where we all get to talk to each other.
Wouldn't that be so nice? Ooh, okay, so, future podcast, I really want to talk about the idea of putting chips in our brains so I don't have to use a phone to talk to everybody.
Oh, no.
Yeah, could you imagine, I could just, telepathically talk to you, Garrison?
You think I'm crazy about my artificial reality.
In your brain? Why not just on the outside so
you
can take it out?
I want one. I want to be one of the first people that's like, yes, put a chip in my brain. I want to be able to talk to whoever I want. The first person that invented the telephone. Yeah. God, what was his name?
Alexander Graham Bell.
Why did I not know that? Anyway,
sure.
I want to. I want a mass amount of information on in my brain at all times.
I want the glasses.
The Google glasses.
I don't know about. I want the heads-up display glasses. I wasn't exactly impressed with the Google glasses.
Oh, so you want to be able to get rid of it anytime?
Yeah, ideally. I would like an effective augmented reality system that has nothing to do with climate change.
Absolutely nothing to do with climate change. Future podcast.
Fascinating. Nothing to do with climate change. You want to bring up another point for us, Garrison?
Yeah.
Oh man, I was gonna bounce off something you said, but
No, bring it up. Let's finish
no,
it.
no, I forgot because things are moving too
If you
fast.
come back to it.
Yeah.
So Pascal's Wager.
Yeah.
Oh man,
So basically,
God exists.
yeah,
You
for
guys are probably in the good.
right, and
Well, you have to believe in God to be in good. If you don't believe in God,
man, we cannot get into a
through
religious discussion.
Pascal's
Don't do
Wager,
Don't
it
do
says
no,
if
but
you.
we have a podcast coming up though.
That's
I
right.
have so many thoughts, and they might be heretical, and I don't know as a good Catholic boy, so you can't do this to me right now.
Right. So for those of you who haven't heard, Pascal's Wager is basically if you live your life as if God does exist, then you have infinite gain, and if you live your life as if he doesn't, you have infinite loss, hell, basically. So
Cool. I would say there's a little more to it.
Right.
'Cause if God doesn't exist, and you don't act as if God exists, you have small time net gains.
mhm,
You have a pleasurable life on Earth.
right.
At least in the notion of I don't know. I'm not sure when Pascal was alive. I assume the Dark Ages.
Yeah, so essentially just replace God with global warming or climate change, and we have a little argument to talk about. So
Yeah, Pascal's exchange of Pascal's wager on climate change. Basically, if climate change is real versus we do something about climate change is not real versus we do something about climate change, and then replace not doing anything with doing something. So. And I guess the interesting part is that a whole bunch of us are still choosing to do different things in, like we've not collectively as a society. It's an individual wager, right? It's how you choose to live life. Is it a question about our carbon footprint then, where it's like how if you live a life that is going to be good for the earth, and then climate change is. I'm not sure where we're going with this.
okay, put a pin in that, because that kind of reminded me of something that Sarah shared on Facebook, I think just yesterday, about like the Nazis.
Oh
Right.
yeah, there was
I
a
saw
cool
that.
Twitter feed that I saw that I shared about Nazism. Basically, Nazism is it's like what was it? It's not a religion. It's an
Ideology.
An
It's a
idea. It's an
political
ideology. And this guy went on kind of like a Twitter rant about how if you share the same ideology of Nazism, then you are a Nazi, or you're advocating for the idealism of Nazis. Now, calling somebody a Nazi, he goes on about this, calling somebody a Nazi isn't a derogatory term. It's telling them that they have the idealism of a Nazi, which is against all other races. So, I mean, I could probably share this on the notes for the podcast, but it basically puts everybody in a box to say, yeah, this idealism may not be right, because you're systematically putting other people in a box by putting yourself in this box saying, I am a white, blonde hair, blue-eyed male that, thinks that all other races are inadequate.
Okay,
Socialist
but that's
and
not what I got from that.
That's not where you picked up?
Yeah, 'cause, towards the end of that rant, he sort of said something along the lines of sort of getting people into a comfortable state to slowly accept radical ideas.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can oh man, I guess we're Nazis now, huh? So so slowly sort of rolling in some of these ideas into the mainstream, they'll be more likely to accept radical ideas further down the line. So
Shifting the overt window, as it were. It was interesting. I wish I had read all of it. As I said quietly under my breath, socialists are weird. of the National Socialist and communist variety.
Right.
It's a scary world we live in, where we have to deal with both Nazis and communists in the 2010s. What happened to why suddenly this resurgence in interest in Germany and Russia?
I think
this is always happening. This
I
what
know,
Garrison,
it's a repeating cycle.
Yeah, that's what Garrison I think is getting at, is that this whole idealism of Nazism is apparent to the point where it's just kind of seeping into people's lives without them even realizing it.
I sure hope not.
Or maybe we are in the future. We have chips in our brains, and we're in a simulation right now. So,
oh my gosh, could you imagine? I love this theory. The theory that you guys familiar with
Garrison's all about it.
I'm trying to remember what exactly it's called. Simulation theory.
right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
So climate change isn't real. We're all a simulation. It's all right.
I mean,
we'll
like,
be all right.
it might. The terrifying thing is when men like Elon Musk talk about this being as a possible reality.
Serious about it.
He's serious about it, and I someone with faith, certainly I look at this situation and I'm like, how can that not be a possibility? For anyone unfamiliar with simulation theory, the thought is that if we are so rapidly advancing in technology every day, then the chances of us being a simulation of a society that has already advanced its technology that quickly is undeniable.
Yeah, like it's already happened.
Yeah, we are a simulation because of evidence that we've produced in our simulation.
Right. I think I would be pretty much okay with any idea like that, like simulation theory and things like that, but it would really suck if I lived in a solipsistic reality. And for those of you who don't know, solipsism is basically thinking that you're the only one that exists, and everything around you is just a construct of your mind. So I guess I would be talking to myself right now if this is the case, but
it's kind of funny thinking about that.
Yeah.
But it's kind of lonely, you know.
Well, okay, so for me, I don't know. It's hard for me to wrap my head around that kind of idea, and I think it's because, like, I know with the pain that I've felt throughout life, there's no way that in my own in my own fake reality, I would put myself in my pain, you know, like, that's what I'm saying. So for me, it's like that pain is so real. Why would why would it be fake? Why would it be, you know, you'd think I'd be in ultimate heaven, right? Science says,
realistically speaking, if it was a society that simulated an existence, chances are they simulated that existence for research, not out of kindness.
Right.
It's fucked up.
It is. It really is.
Oh, speaking of simulation, I was listening to this Duncan Trussell podcast, and Dan Harmon was on it, and
man,
and
it's so depressing.
Right, but Duncan brought up something like we're actually in a simulation, but we're in like some guy's basement from the 1970s.
Oh god!
So it's kind of weird, but
All right, guys, we're at time.
We're at time. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that
Look
ended
at
on
climate
a
change. Look at it. Read everything you can, and then make a decision for yourself.
Look at Pascal's Wager.
Yeah. Sorry, we didn't really get to cover all of our talking points, but maybe we'll continue this in a future podcast. Thanks for watching the Theory of Creativity's theory of climate change.
Thank you so much for having me, Garrett and Sarah.
Namaste.
No problem.
Namaste.